The Holy Gospel according to St. John in the 21st chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
After he appeared to his followers in Jerusalem, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." And they said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" And they answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you'll find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and he jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you've just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them. He did the same with fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you'll stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. And after he said to him, he said, "Follow me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, grace and peace be yours from God our Father and from our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. There's a story of a young woman who wanted to go to college after school, high school, but her heart sank when she read a question on the application. And the question simply asked, "Are you a leader?" So she had to be honest, she wasn't really a leader in her school, at least not by the way other people thought of themselves as leaders. And so she wrote no on her application, and she sent it in expecting the worst. To her surprise, the young woman received this letter from the college. "Dear applicant, a study of the application form reveals that this year our college will have 1,452 new leaders. And we're accepting you because we feel it's imperative that they have at least one follower." I bring that up just to remind us that as we live in and lean into this Easter season, that we are Easter people, and that first and foremost means that we are followers of Jesus. We don't need to worry so much about the leading, because as we follow Jesus, we will become leaders through the gift of God's life in our life. And so let's look at this story that we have for today. In our gospel story, we have this story about breakfast on the beach with Jesus and his disciples. And as we do, we enter further into this Easter season and what the work of Easter is about. And it means to work out what this resurrection set loose in the world means for us as a people. What does it mean for us as a church? What does it mean for us in our individual lives? You know, they say one of the oddest experiences of Easter is that it can feel kind of empty sometimes after we've had a very full midweek Lenten service, or maybe the Holy Week with all the Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday. And when we get to Easter, after all of these times together, we come and celebrate an empty tomb. You know, Easter, by contrast, is about absence. The body is no longer there in the tomb, and we are kind of left in these first weeks of Easter to kind of figure out, what does that mean then for me? And today's story kind of makes it clear that one of the functions of the resurrection life that is given for us is about restoration. And it's about relationship between each of us and God. Peter announces today in this story that it makes it clear that one of the functions of resurrection life is to help us have the sense of reconnect with God. And so we're to receive this good news of God and to know that we are restored and that we are reconciled as an individual, but as a people of God in the world. And so Peter announces he's going to go fishing because he's not really sure yet what to do. Several of his disciples decide they're going to go along. And when you think about it, the prior chapters that lead up to this, Peter has denied Jesus, just recently. And then he fled the scene of the crucifixion. And though we kind of know throughout the story that Peter really loves Jesus, his fear, though, has somehow taken a hold of him and caused him to act differently. It's caused him to distance himself from Jesus, and we just saw that. And so we're left to imagine that he is probably feeling kind of disappointed with himself. He might be feeling some guilt, maybe some shame, that he wasn't there for his Lord in those final hours. And it seems that Peter, as a result of that, decided, well, I got to do something with my life, and so he returns to what he knows, which is fishing. Amid the confusion and the grief of the aftermath of the crucifixion, he feels most like himself as a fisherman. That's what he did before Jesus was there, handling those heavy nets when you go into the night on those all-night fishing excursions. The thing is, his efforts are fruitless. After a night of fishing with the boys, they catch exactly 0 fish. And on top of this grief, he's having the sense that he failed Jesus. Now he's going back to something that he always knew how to do, and he's failing at that. So he's feeling pretty rough right now. But as the dawn breaks, as the darkness begins to go away, the disciples see a man on the shore. They see the smoke from this charcoal fire. The stranger from the distance calls out to them and suggests something very odd. Hey, cast your nets on the other side of the boat. That's what he shouts across the water. And so, surprisingly, maybe the disciples, they comply. They probably roll their eyes a little bit. And suddenly, the net's full of fish. It seems pretty miraculous. And suddenly then Peter also realizes that he's seen something like this before. It was what you would maybe call a deja vu moment. You know, maybe he saw it on a hillside with thousands of people as he watched Jesus take a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish and break bread and distribute it among the thousands of people there. Or maybe he remembered that moment when he was at that wedding in Cana. You remember there's all this water, and next thing you know, there's all this wine. And he was there, and he saw that experience. And then when the beloved disciple shouts out, hey, it's the Lord, Peter jumps out of the boat and clambers towards the shore with excitement. In fact, it is Jesus. And he invites them all to come and have breakfast, as though it's just another normal day in the post-resurrection world for Jesus. Now, the disciples are probably shooting looks of amazement at each other as they're looking across this charcoal fire and eating breakfast. And they're wondering, is this real? Kind of pinch me. And the story then provides, I think, for us a little bit of a bookend between the last meal we saw Jesus having with his disciples, the Last Supper, and now this first meal he's having with them to break the fast. So you could call it the first breakfast, maybe, that he had with them. And it helps them change their mode of feelings. They're going from grief and maybe some confusion to now a sense of purpose and maybe even a sense of mission. Jesus is back. He's in their midst, and he's given them something to think about and to work for. You know, everything Jesus said before his crucifixion is now coming to bear on them as his disciples and their purpose. But first, Jesus has some specific business that he wants to accomplish with Peter. And it always bears repeating that Peter, in so many gospel stories, is kind of a stand-in for each of us here. You know, he had enthusiasm for Jesus. He had some awkwardness about being a follower. He had a lack of understanding sometimes, but he had this enormous sense of love for being a follower in faith of Jesus. So when the gospel story focuses on Peter, some commentaries say that's the time where we think about ourselves as well and what's our role in this part of the story. You know, before his arrest and crucifixion, Jesus tells Peter that he was going to deny him. Sadly, that prediction comes true. And Peter we know was kind of accosted by all of the followers and the bystanders when he was waiting outside, and they said, "Hey, you're with him, weren't you?" And he said, "No." And he denies him 3 times. And then he's absent at the crucifixion. And he's among those disciples who meet behind the locked doors afterwards. He's kind of become aloof. And now here it is a couple days later, and here he is on the beach, and Jesus is talking to him directly, and he says to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He asks him 3 times, and 3 times Peter affirms this. He says yes for Jesus, and each time Jesus says, "Then feed my sheep." You got to believe this is a moment of grace where he's been feeling just so aloof and so guilty and so hurting, and Jesus comes to him and embraces him and brings them back together. I heard a story this week that made me think differently about this, and it was about an American tourist who was traveling over in the Middle East, and he came upon several shepherds. There were 3 shepherds that had all of their flocks of sheep, and they were all coming and converging on this one watering hole to get some drinking water for their sheep. So there's kind of 3 shepherds, but then all these sheep are just all together drinking water. And finally, one of the shepherds turned toward the sheep and just said, "Mana, mana, mana," which is an Aramaic word for "follow me, it's time to go, get out of there so we can leave." And it was strange. About a third of the sheep lift up their heads and they look at their shepherd and they all follow him and walk away. The second one comes out, does the same thing. Those other sheep stop and look at him. The other ones keep drinking, and then he goes off with them. And the tourist was there looking at the third shepherd and said, "Hey, could I wear your tunic and maybe hold on to your staff and see if I can get them to follow me away like that?" And the guy kind of smiled and he said, "Sure, why not?" And he gets up there, and maybe it was an American accent. I don't know what it was, but he said the same words, and the sheep just didn't even budge. They just kept drinking water. And finally, he looks at the other person and he says to the shepherd, "Do you think, will the sheep ever follow someone else other than you because they know your voice so well?" And this is what the shepherd said. He said, "Oh, yes. Sometimes when a sheep gets sick, it'll follow anyone." When I heard that story, it made me think about Peter. It made me think about me, because remember, we're standing in for Peter. Peter had been sick, in a sense, from the fear that he experienced of Jesus being captured, of thinking his life as a disciple was over, of going through the crucifixion and not knowing what was going to happen next. And so rather than following Jesus, the shepherd, he followed his fear. And it took him outside and away from Jesus. And then today, in our story, he is experiencing grace firsthand. He hears not the voice of fear this time, but instead he hears the voice of his shepherd, Jesus, who's talking directly to him and asking him to feed his sheep. Jesus tells him what to do with the love that he's given to him, and he says, "Feed my flock." And though the words forgiveness aren't really appearing in this story, I think it's a critical theme here. There is a reconciliation, a bringing back together of lost sheep in Peter and the shepherd once again. And then here's Peter, the spoiled, kind of the brazen, big-mouthed disciple who said he was never going to deny, but he does. Now he's given the opportunity to face his risen Lord and begin again, to start over. This story offers some of the deepest implications of what resurrection has for us as a people. A lot of times through the New Testament, you'll hear Jesus say things like, "Fear not," or you'll hear angels say to people who are announcing the coming of Jesus, "Fear not, good news is coming to you." And so we hear that first, but secondly, we hear and understand that we are forgiven. God comes to us to love us and bring us a sense of reconnect between God. And then we're invited to start over. And then we find we are completely loved. Love that goes to a cross. And then we find, as the disciples do today, that we have a job. We have work to do. We have holy work to do. We have kingdom work to do. And that word, as Jesus said on that last night he was with his disciples, was to love. We're called not only to proclaim God's love known to us through Jesus, but to act on it. And that means setting aside fear and the way that binds fear into our small lives and embracing the love as this basis of everything we do that can help us live larger lives. God's love set loose in the world in the resurrection needs our hands, it needs our feet, it needs our hearts to make it concrete in our place and time to the people who also need it. And we are experiencing God's grace. And like Peter, we're invited to change our perspective, to cast our nets where the love of God is available for us. And we find that there's plenty of that for all to go around. Jesus invites us and he says, come and have breakfast. Experience my grace, have some grace, and then go and be grace. In the morning light of the resurrection, there is no room for guilt and for fear. So don't worry about that application where you're asked to be a leader. Just say, I'm going to be a follower. And God will allow you to become a leader as you follow. We are forgiven. We're loved and we are freed. And by the way, we've got some sheep to feed. So let us go in peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.